She was an innocent girl, relentlessly stalked by an ex who swore he'd never leave her alone. Not knowing who else to turn to, she hands a note to the millionaire. "Help me." And when he reads it, if this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Stay tuned. The rain battered the streets of Boston with an almost punitive intensity, as if the sky had decided to wash away all the city's sins at once. Dawn walked along the soaked sidewalks, her worn-out sneakers letting the icy water seep through to her bones. Her mother's old coat, inherited from better times, weighed on her shoulders like a useless armor against the cold that came not only from the weather, but from deep within her chest. At 18, she carried in her eyes the weight of someone who had learned too early that the world could be cruel. Daughter of Catherine, a seamstress who spent nights hunched over her sewing machine to dress the wealthy ladies of Beacon Hill, Dawn grew up backstage to opulence, always observing from afar a world that seemed made of crystal and to which she would never belong. Her hands trembled as she held the crumpled paper in her pocket. Just 3 words, written in the shaky handwriting of someone who had no alternatives left. "Help me." She had spent the entire night wondering if she would have the courage to do this, if she would actually make it there, if he would receive her or if he would have security remove her like an intruder. Jason wasn't just threatening anymore. The night before, he had broken the window of the house where she lived with her mother, leaving glass shards scattered across the floor like a sinister promise of what was to come. "You're mine, Dawn," he had shouted from the street, waking all the neighbors. "If you can't be mine, you won't be anyone else's." The relationship with Jason had begun like a fairy tale for a girl who had never known luxury. He appeared in her life like a Prince Charming, with his winning smile and promises to take her away from that simple life. At first, the constant attention made her feel special, desired, but gradually that attention transformed into surveillance, affection into control, love into possession. When she tried to end it 3 months ago, she discovered the real Jason. The threat started subtly, then became direct. He knew where she worked, knew her schedule, appeared in the most unexpected places. Dawn's mother, a strong woman who had faced life alone since her husband abandoned them, tried to intervene. But Jason was clever, manipulative. He knew exactly how to play the victim, and how to make Dawn seem like the villain of the story. Now standing before the mirrored building of Reed Corporation, Dawn felt her legs weaken. The lobby was immense, covered in marble and polished metal, with elegant people moving about as if they were pieces in a rehearsed ballet. Impeccably suited executives walked hurriedly, high-heeled women clicked along the corridors, and there in the middle of all that sophistication, she felt completely out of place. She knew Ethan Reed only by sight and by reputation. Her mother had sewn clothes for some of the women who attended the events of Boston's elite, and his name always appeared in whispered conversations. Powerful businessman, owner of an empire built on steel and concrete, but also on a reputation of being a ruthless man in business and completely inaccessible in the personal field. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a plasticized professional smile, looked her up and down with barely disguised contempt. "Mr. Reed doesn't receive anyone without an appointment," she said, before Dawn could even open her mouth. "Please," Dawn murmured, taking the paper from her pocket. "It's urgent, very urgent." Something in her tone, perhaps the desperation she couldn't hide, made the receptionist hesitate. Dawn seized that moment of uncertainty to insist, "I just need to deliver this to him, personally, please." It was 15 minutes of waiting that felt like 15 hours. Dawn sat there on the leather sofa in the lobby, watching the movement, trying not to think about what she would do if he refused to help her. There was no plan B. There was nowhere to run. When the elevator finally opened and she saw Ethan Reed for the first time, her heart raced. He was exactly as she had imagined and completely different at the same time. Tall dark hair with silver strands at the temples that betrayed his 42 years, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her house's annual rent. But it was his eyes that impressed her most. Grey like tempered steel, cold, calculating, protected by an invisible barrier that seemed to prevent anyone from getting close. He observed her for a long moment, and Dawn felt as if she were being evaluated, measured, judged. Then, without saying a word, she stood up and walked toward him, extending the folded paper with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. Ethan took the note, unfolded it slowly, read the 3 words written there. For an instant, something changed. In his expression, as if a tiny crack had opened in the emotional armor he wore. "Help me!" Those 2 simple words pierced through Ethan like a sharp blade. Awakening. Something he had buried so deeply that he believed it was dead forever. Ethan stood motionless for long seconds, the paper between his fingers as if it were made of fire. There was something about that young woman that completely disarmed him. Something in the raw vulnerability she radiated, mixed with a silent courage that touched him in an inexplicable way. Since the death of Helen, his wife, in an accident that still haunted him during sleepless nights, he had built emotional walls, so high that not even he could climb them anymore. "Come with me," he finally said, his husky voice echoing through the lobby. It wasn't a request, it was an order, but there was something almost gentle in the way he gestured for her to follow him to the private elevator. Dawn accompanied him in silence, her steps echoing timidly on the marble floor. In the elevator, the silence between them was dense, charged with a tension that neither could identify. She could smell his cologne, masculine and sophisticated, mixed with the aroma of fine leather from his suit. Ethan, in turn, noticed every detail about her. The brown hair damp from the rain, the simple but clean clothes, the almost imperceptible tremor of her hands. In his office, an imposing environment with a panoramic view of the city, Dawn told her story. She spoke of Jason, of the threats, of the constant feeling of being watched, of the broken glass and sinister promises. Her voice faltered several times, but she continued, because she knew this was her only chance for salvation. Ethan listened without interrupting, his eyes fixed on her, his expression unchanging. When she finished, he stood up and walked to the window, looking at the city below as if searching for answers in the lights that were beginning to come on as evening fell. "Why me?" he asked without turning around. "Why did you come to me?" Dawn swallowed hard. Because I heard that you're a powerful man, and because," she hesitated, then completed with brutal honesty, "because I have no one else." That confession hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. There was a loneliness in that phrase that he intimately recognized, a familiar pain that made him involuntarily clench his fists. When he turned to look at her again, he had made a decision that contradicted every fiber of his cold logic. "You will be under my protection," he said, and the words left his mouth before he could fully rationalize what he was doing. "I have a property away from the city. You'll be safe there." Dawn felt tears spring to her eyes, a mixture of relief and disbelief. I can't pay." "I didn't ask for payment," Ethan interrupted her, his voice harsher than he intended. The truth was that he himself didn't understand why he was doing this. There was something about her that awakened a protective instinct he thought had died years ago. An hour later, Dawn was in an armored car beside Ethan, leaving Boston behind. The mansion was about an hour from the capital, hidden among acres of preserved forest. It was a refuge he had built years ago, when business became too dangerous and he needed a place where he could disappear from the world. The property was imposing, yet welcoming. A 2-story house with modern architecture, surrounded by gardens that looked like paintings and protected by an invisible but absolute security system. For Dawn, accustomed to the simple 2-room house where she lived with her mother, it seemed like a palace. "You'll stay in the East Wing room," Ethan explained as he led her through the wide corridors. "There are clothes in the closet, everything you need. My staff has been instructed to attend to any request of yours." The room was larger than Dawn's entire house, a huge bed with sheets white as snow, a balcony overlooking the garden, a luxurious bathroom with a tub she could get lost in. It was all perfect, except for one detail, the feeling of being in a golden prison. "And you?" she asked timidly. "Stay at the other end of the house," Ethan replied, and there was something deliberate in this distance he was creating. "You don't need to worry about me. This wing is entirely yours." But even with all that physical distance, both immediately felt that there would be no emotional distance sufficient to protect them from what was beginning to be born between them. That first night, Dawn took a long bath, put on the silk nightgown she found in the closet and lay down in the most comfortable bed of her life. She should have been happy, relieved, grateful. Instead, she felt strangely restless, as if something important was missing. On the other side of the house, Ethan worked in his private office, trying to concentrate on the financial reports spread out on the desk. But his mind kept returning to the young woman now sleeping under his roof. There was something deeply wrong with the situation, something that went beyond the difference in age or social position. It was the way she looked at him, the way her presence filled empty spaces he didn't even know existed. Around 2 in the morning, he decided to check if everything was okay. He walked silently through the corridors to the east wing, just to make sure she was safe. What he didn't expect was to find her in the kitchen, barefoot, making tea. "Can't sleep?" he asked, and his voice in the silence of the early morning seemed more intimate than it should. Dawn turned around, startled, and Ethan felt his breath catch, with her hair loose falling over her shoulders and the silk nightgown highlighting every curve of her young body. She was temptation personified. "I'm sorry," she murmured, blushing. "I was thirsty." "No need to apologize," he said, maintaining a safe distance. "This is your home now." But as he said it, they both knew that this house was becoming something much more dangerous than a simple refuge. The days at the mansion became a delicate dance between closeness and distance, between desire and resistance. Dawn tried to adapt to the new reality, but every moment in Ethan's presence was like walking on hot coals. There was something in the way he looked at her, in the silences that stretched between them, in the almost palpable tension that filled the air whenever they were in the same environment. Ethan had established a rigid routine to avoid unnecessary encounters. He left early for the company, returned late, dined in his office, but even so it was impossible not to cross paths with her. Dawn had discovered she liked to walk in the gardens at dusk, and from his office window, Ethan found himself watching her for long minutes, hypnotized by the natural grace with which she moved among the flowers. She now wore the clothes he had ordered especially for her, simple but elegant dresses that enhanced her natural beauty without ostentation. Each piece had been personally chosen by him, on an afternoon when he caught himself imagining how each fabric, each color would look on her. It was a dangerous intimacy, almost as if he were dressing her with his own hands. "You're different," commented Marcus, his partner, and only true friend, during a meeting. "For weeks I haven't seen you so at present." Ethan looked up from the documents, irritated with himself for having been distracted again. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do," Marcus insisted, a mischievous smile on his face. "There's a woman in your life, isn't there?" The question hit Ethan like a shot. There was a woman, yes, but not in the way Marcus imagined. Dawn wasn't his lover, wasn't even his company. She was his... what? His protégé? His obsession? His doom? "Don't mix personal life with business," Ethan replied coldly. But Marcus knew him too well to be fooled. That night, Ethan arrived home later than usual, hoping Dawn would already be asleep. But he found her in the living room, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, watching an old movie on television. She was wearing one of the nightgowns he had bought, and her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. "Good evening," she said softly, without taking her eyes off the screen. "Why are you still awake?" he asked, loosening his tie. "I can't sleep early," Dawn admitted. "I'm used to the sounds of the city. It's too quiet here." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then sat in the armchair next to the couch. "What do you miss?" The question surprised her. In the 15 days she had been there, this was the first time he had shown genuine personal interest in her. "My mother," she answered without hesitation. "Our nightly rituals. She always made chamomile tea, and we would talk about the day, about silly dreams, about recipes she wanted to try." Dawn smiled sadly. Little things that now seem very important. And her? Is she safe? I sent her to my aunt's house in Vermont. Jason doesn't know about that side of the family. Dawn turned to look at him directly. It was you who organized her trip, wasn't it? The ticket, the money. Ethan neither confirmed nor denied, but the silence was answer enough. Why are you doing all this? Dawn asked, her voice laden with genuine curiosity. Why do you care about a stranger? It was the question Ethan asked himself every night. Perhaps because I recognize something familiar in your story, he finally answered. Have you been threatened? I lost someone I loved because I couldn't protect her. The silence that followed was dense, laden with unspoken pain. Dawn felt immense compassion for the man beside her, realizing that behind all that armor were deep wounds that still bled. What was her name? Dawn asked gently. Helen, Ethan answered, and the name came out like a prayer. My wife. She died 5 years ago in a car accident. I was traveling on business. I wasn't there to protect her. It wasn't your fault. No? He laughed bitterly. I had received threats from a competitor. I should have taken them. Seriously, should have hired security for her. Instead, I thought nothing would happen. Dawn felt a pang in her chest. Suddenly, she understood the almost desperate need he had to protect her, as if saving her life could somehow redeem the life he couldn't save. You can't blame yourself forever, she said softly. I can and I will, Ethan replied with cold determination. It's the only way to ensure I don't make the same mistake twice. They sat there for another hour, watching the movie in silence but aware of each other in a way that was almost physical. When Dawn finally stood up to go to bed, she passed too close to his armchair. The soft perfume she wore, something floral and delicate, enveloped Ethan like a caress. For an instant their hands touched when she supported herself on the arm of his chair to keep her balance. It was a quick touch, seemingly accidental, but it set both their skins on fire. Good night, Ethan, she whispered, and it was the first time she had used his name without formalities. He didn't respond, just watched her climb the stairs, every movement of hers etched in his memory like a sweet torture. That night Ethan couldn't sleep. He stayed on the balcony of his room, smoking one cigarette after another, fighting against the insane desire to walk across the house and knock on her door. What would he do? What would he say? That he was falling in love with an 18-year-old girl who was under his protection? That he desired her in a way that went against everything he believed in? From her room, Dawn also couldn't sleep. Lying on the huge bed, hugging the pillow, she wondered if what she felt was gratitude or something much more dangerous. There was something in Ethan's sadness, in the vulnerability he showed only in moments of carelessness, that attracted her irresistibly. For the first time since she arrived there, Dawn wondered if the greatest danger was no longer out there with Jason, but in here, with the feelings that grew each day, each look, each unspoken word. And somewhere in the city, Jason planned his revenge, because men like him didn't accept defeats, and his obsession with Dawn had transformed into something much darker and more dangerous. The storm arrived without warning in the third week. Lightning cut the night sky like luminous scars, and the wind howled through the trees surrounding the mansion. Dawn woke to the deafening sound of thunder, her heart racing. Since childhood, she had been terrified of storms, a phobia her mother had tried unsuccessfully to cure. She wrapped herself in the silk robe and left the room, seeking some comfort in the silent house. Going down the stairs, she noticed a light on in Ethan's office. She hesitated for a moment, then knocked lightly on the half-open door. "Come in," said his voice, husky and tired. Ethan was sitting behind the desk, documents scattered around, a half-empty bottle of whiskey at his side. He looked older in that yellow light, his features marked by exhaustion and something deeper that Dawn was beginning to recognize: loneliness. "Can't sleep because of the storm?" he asked, noting her nervousness. "Never could," Dawn admitted, approaching slowly. "And you? Why are you still working?" Ethan laughed bitterly. "Work is safer than sleep. In dreams we have no control over what appears. Dawn then realized he was drinking more than he should, that there was a particular sadness tonight, as if the storm outside echoed some internal turbulence. "It's her birthday today," Ethan said suddenly, without Dawn asking. "Helen would be 40 today." Dawn's heart tightened. She came closer, noticing the portrait on the desk, a blonde, elegant woman smiling at the camera with a happiness that seemed genuine. "She was beautiful," Dawn said softly. "She was perfect," Ethan replied, eyes fixed on the photo. "Born in the same social class as me, educated to be the ideal wife for a businessman. She never questioned me, never challenged me, always knew exactly what to say and how to act." There was something in the way he spoke that made Dawn wonder if that perfection was really what he loved about Helen, or just what he believed he should love. Another thunderclap roared outside, making Dawn involuntarily startle. Without thinking, Ethan stood up and walked to her. "Come here," he said, extending his hand. Dawn accepted his hand, feeling the warm, rough skin against hers. He led her to the leather sofa in the office, both sitting closer than prudence would recommend. "Tell me about your first love," Ethan said suddenly, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Dawn blushed. "Jason was my first love. And my first boyfriend? Actually, my only boyfriend." "How did you meet him?" "At a friend's graduation party. He appeared like the Prince Charming every girl dreams of finding. Caring, attentive, made me feel special." Dawn sighed sadly. "At first, I thought I had won the love lottery." "And when did you realize you were wrong? When he started wanting to control who I talked to, what clothes I wore, where I went? He said it was love, that men who truly love are possessive." Dawn looked at Ethan. "Now I know that true love liberates. It doesn't imprison." Ethan was silent for a long moment. "You're very young to know that." "Maybe, but trauma teaches quickly." There was a wisdom in her words that contrasted with her age, a maturity forged in pain that Ethan recognized and respected. "Can I ask you something?" Dawn said hesitantly. "You can. Why did you never marry again? I mean, after Helen?" The question hit Ethan like a punch. "Because it would be a betrayal of her memory, and because—" He hesitated, then completed with brutal honesty. "Because I'm afraid of failing again." "What if you're hiding behind guilt to avoid risking being happy again?" Dawn's observation was like a blade cutting through his defenses. No one had ever dared to confront him that way. No one had seen beyond the narrative of eternal mourning he had built around himself. "Aren't you afraid of being happy again?" He returned the question, turning to look at her directly. "I am," Dawn admitted, "but I'm more afraid of living in fear forever." They were very close now, their faces just inches apart. Dawn could see the golden nuances in his grey eyes, could smell the masculine cologne mixed with the aroma of whiskey. Ethan, in turn, was hypnotized by her pink lips, by the vulnerability and strength that coexisted in her gaze. "Dawn," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse at the same time. "Tell me," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "You know this is wrong, don't you? You under my protection, me being responsible for your safety." "And you know I don't care, don't you?" she replied with a courage that surprised her. Ethan's hand rose, almost against his will, and gently caressed her face. Dawn closed her eyes, surrendering to that touch as if it were the first time someone touched her with true tenderness. "You're very young," he murmured, but his hand didn't move away. "And you're very hurt," she replied, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "But that doesn't mean we can't heal together." They were so close that their lips almost touched. The world outside disappeared, the storm becoming just a distant soundtrack for that moment that seemed suspended in time. But then a particularly strong flash of lightning illuminated the garden outside, and in the fleeting light, Ethan saw their reflection in the window, a 42-year-old man almost kissing an 18-year-old girl. The image hit him like a slap in the face. He pulled away abruptly, running his hands through his hair. "This can't happen," he said, more to himself than to her. Dawn felt her face burn with shame and rejection. Ethan, you should go to your room. Now. The sudden coldness in his voice was like a bucket of cold water. Dawn stood up, tears burning in her eyes. I'm sorry, she murmured, quickly leaving the office. Ethan remained alone, head in his hands, fighting against the desire to run after her and finish what they had almost started. But he knew that if he did, there would be no turning back. And he wasn't sure if he was prepared for the consequences of surrendering to that feeling that was growing inside him like an uncontrolled fire. Outside, the storm continued to roar, as if nature itself were echoing the turbulence that now dominated both their hearts. The following days were a hell of awkward silences and avoided glances. Ethan returned to his rigid routine of avoiding Dawn at all costs, leaving earlier and returning later, as if her very presence in the house were a temptation too dangerous to face. Dawn, in turn, felt humiliated and confused, infinitely replaying that moment in the office, wondering if she had imagined the desire in his eyes or if there really was something there that he was fighting to deny. It was Martha, the middle-aged housekeeper, who had taken care of the house for years, who broke the uncomfortable silence. She found Dawn in the kitchen on a rainy morning, distractedly stirring a cup of coffee that was already cold. "Girl, you look like someone who missed the last bus," said Martha, with her typical frankness from rural Vermont. "And the boss isn't much better. Yesterday he scolded the gardener because the roses were crooked. Crooked! As if roses could be crooked." Dawn blushed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do." Martha sat beside her. "Look, I'm not one to stick my nose where it doesn't belong, but I've worked for that man for 8 years. I've never seen him look at any woman after Mrs. Helen died, until you appeared. He looks at me like a protector, looks at someone under his responsibility, that's all." Martha let out a laugh. "Girl, if you believe that, you're more innocent than I." Thought, a man doesn't go 3 days without sleeping properly because of responsibility. He does it because of desire. "How do you know he's not sleeping?" "Because I pass by his office every night. The light stays on until dawn, and when I wake up at 5 in the morning to start work, he's already having coffee in a suit ready to leave." Martha made a significant pause. "And you're not sleeping either. I see your lights on when I go to get something from the pantry." Dawn lowered her eyes, involuntarily confirming Martha's observation. "Look, I'm not going to give love advice to anyone," Martha continued, "but I'll tell you one thing. That man needs to stop living in the past. And you need to stop feeling guilty for being alive and for feeling what you feel." That afternoon, as if fate were conspiring against them both, a heavy rain began to fall just as Ethan arrived home. His car couldn't climb the wet slope to the garage, and he had to leave it at the gate, running through the rain to the house. When he reached the main door, he was soaked. Dawn, who had seen the scene from the living room window, ran to get towels. When he entered, she was there, waiting for him with a large towel in her hands like a concerned wife receiving her husband. The image hit them simultaneously, loaded with a domestic intimacy that neither was prepared to feel. "Thank you," Ethan murmured, avoiding looking at her directly as he dried his hair. "You should take a hot shower," Dawn said softly. "Otherwise you'll get sick." It was a genuine concern, almost maternal, but the way she said it, the proximity between them, transformed the words into something much more intimate. "Dawn," Ethan said, finally looking at her. "About the other." "Night, you don't need to explain," she quickly interrupted him. "I understand. It was a moment of weakness for both of us. It won't happen again." But even as she said this, her eyes said the opposite, and Ethan, who had spent his entire life reading people, couldn't ignore what he saw there. Desire, confusion, and something that terrified him more than anything else. Love. "It wasn't weakness," he said softly, taking a step toward her. "It was the opposite. It was the most real thing I've felt in years." Dawn felt her heart race. "Then why did you stop?" "Because I'm twice your age. Because you're under my protection. Because you're afraid," she completed, taking a step toward him as, well, they were close again, the electric tension between them almost palpable. "Of course I'm afraid," Ethan admitted. "You're young, pure, have your whole life ahead of you. I'm a marked man with ghosts that haunt me every night. I don't have the right to drag you into this darkness." "What if I want to be dragged?" Dawn asked, her voice almost a whisper. "Don't you see?" Question broke Ethan's last resistance. His hands rose to touch her face, his thumbs caressing her rosy cheeks. "You don't know what you're saying," he murmured. "Yes, I do," Dawn replied, covering his hands with hers. "I know that you blame yourself for not saving Helen. I know you believe you don't deserve a second chance to be happy. I know you're fighting against what you feel for me because you think it's wrong." "It is wrong," he said, but his voice no longer had conviction. "Why is it wrong for two adults to fall in love?" "Because I should be strong enough to resist. Because you should be with someone your age, someone who can grow with you, and—" "What if I don't want that?" Dawn interrupted him. "What if I want you, with all your ghosts, with all your darkness? What if I don't want a boy who grows with me, but a man who teaches me to grow?" Her words were like a punch to the chest. There was a maturity there that contrasted with her age, a determination that completely disarmed him. "Dawn," he whispered, and her name on his lips sounded like surrender. This time, when their mouths approached, there was no interruption. The kiss was soft at first, almost reverent, as if Ethan were kissing something sacred. But when Dawn responded, entwining her fingers in his hair, the softness gave way to passion. It was Dawn's first true kiss, the first in which she surrendered completely, without fear, without reservations. And for Ethan, it was the first kiss. In 5 years, that meant something beyond physical need. It was rebirth, it was hope. It was the terrible and wonderful sensation of being alive again. When they separated, both were breathless, their gazes loaded with a new intensity. "Now, I can't pretend I don't feel," Ethan said, resting his forehead on hers. "And I don't want you to pretend," Dawn replied, but even in that moment of mutual surrender, neither of them imagined that in the vicinity of the property, Jason had finally discovered where she was, hidden, and that his obsession had transformed into something much darker and more dangerous than anyone could have predicted. After the kiss, everything changed, not in an obvious or dramatic way, but in the small things that made their coexistence charged with a new and dangerous intimacy. Ethan no longer deliberately avoided her. Instead, he found excuses to be in the same environments as her, checking some documents in the library when Dawn was reading, having coffee in the kitchen when she was preparing lunch, walking in the gardens at the same times as her. Dawn felt the change in the way he looked at her. It was no longer the protective and distant look from before. It was something more intense, hungrier, as if he were constantly fighting against the desire to touch her again. "You're different," she observed one morning, as she found him in the kitchen preparing coffee. "Different how?" Ethan asked, but there was an almost imperceptible smile at the corner of his lips. "Less grumpy, less absent." He approached her, taking a cup from the cabinet above her head, forcing her to be pressed between his body and the counter. The movement was apparently casual, but both felt the electricity of the contact. "Maybe it's because I found something that makes me want to be present," he murmured against her ear, before moving away with the naturalness of someone who hadn't said anything special. Dawn stood there, heart racing, cheeks on fire, wondering how a man could be so devastatingly seductive without even trying. The nights became the most dangerous time. After dinner, they had developed the habit of staying in the living room, she reading while he worked on his laptop, or watching old movies they found on cable channels. It was a domestic intimacy that they both savored and feared at the same time. "Tell me about your dreams," Ethan said on one of those nights, after closing his laptop and focusing entirely on her. Dawn lowered her book. "What kind of dreams?" "The ones you had before all this happened, what you wanted to do with your life." "I wanted to be a teacher," she answered without hesitation. "Of literature. I dreamed of inspiring teenagers to fall in love with books, like I did. And now? Now I don't know anymore. It seems like my previous life belonged to someone else." Ethan moved from the sofa to the armchair closest to her. "You can still be a teacher. When all this is over—" "When all this is over," Dawn interrupted him, I'll go back to my simple life, and you'll go back to your world of business and social commitments. And this," she gestured between them, "will just be a memory." The observation hit him like a slap. "Is that what you think?" "It's what will happen," she said with a sadness that broke his heart. "People like us don't stay together in the real world, Ethan. This here is like a dream, but dreams always end." Ethan stood up and went to her, kneeling beside the armchair where she was sitting. "What if I don't want it to be just a dream?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Don't say that if it's not true," Dawn whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "When was the last time I lied to you?" The question made her reflect. Since they met, Ethan had been brutally honest about everything, his motivations, his fears, his feelings. "Never," she admitted. "Then believe me now. I don't know how, I don't know when, but we'll find a way to be together." The kiss that followed was different from the first. There was no more hesitation, no more fighting against the inevitable. It was the complete surrender of two hearts that had found in each other something they didn't even know they were looking for. But reality has a cruel way of interrupting perfect moments. Ethan's phone rang in the middle of the night, 3 days. Later, it was Kevin, head of security for the property. "Mr. Reed, we have a problem. The cameras detected suspicious movement in the western perimeter. It looks like someone is reconnoitering the area." Ethan sat up in bed, instantly alert. "How many people?" "At least 3, and sir, they know exactly where the cameras are. They're avoiding the monitoring points." "Reinforce security. No one enters or leaves without my authorization. And Kevin, don't mention anything to Dawn yet." But Dawn, who had developed the light sleep of someone who had lived months in a state of alert, heard the conversation through the thin walls between the rooms. The next morning, Ethan tried to act normally, but she noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he obsessively checked his cell phone, the furtive glances he cast out the windows. "He found me, didn't he?" she asked during breakfast. Ethan stopped stirring sugar in his coffee. "Who?" "Jason. Please don't lie to me." His silence was answer enough. "What are we going to do?" Dawn asked, and there was a strange calm in her voice that worried him more than if she had panicked. "You're not going to do anything. You're going to stay here, safe, while I resolve this." "And if you can't resolve it? If he—" "That won't happen," Ethan interrupted her with a firmness that admitted no discussion. "I won't let anything happen to you." But that afternoon, while Ethan was in a video conference with the security team, Dawn did something that would change everything. She began to search the house library, looking for something to distract herself, when she found a box of old documents forgotten on one of the highest shelves. Inside the box, among contracts and papers yellowed by time, she found a folder with the name Richard Thompson, Dissolved Partnership. Her heart almost stopped. Richard Thompson was the name on her birth certificate, the name of the father she never knew, whom her mother always refused to talk about. With trembling hands, she opened the folder. There were partnership contracts, legal correspondence, and in the middle of everything, a handwritten letter with Ethan's handwriting. "Richard, after everything you did, after trying to destroy everything I built, I never want to see you near me or anything that's mine again. You are a man without character, and I hope that one day you pay for all your betrayals." The letter was dated 18 years ago. 18 years. Dawn felt the world spin around her. Richard Thompson wasn't just the man who had tried to destroy Ethan in business. He was her father, and Ethan had known this from the beginning. It all made sense now. The ease with which he had accepted helping her, the almost desperate protection, the guilt in his eyes whenever he looked at her. He wasn't falling in love with her. He was doing penance for her father's sins. When Ethan entered the library an hour later, he found Dawn sitting on the floor, the open folder beside her, her face as pale as paper. "Dawn," he began, but she stood up before he could continue. "You knew," she said, her voice cold as ice. "From the first day you knew who I was." Ethan closed his eyes, knowing that this moment would come sooner or later. "I can explain." "Explain what? That all this was a lie? That you protected me? Not because you cared about me, but because you felt guilty about what you did to my father." It wasn't like that. Then how was it? Dawn shouted, all the pent-up emotions of the last few days exploding at once. How was it, Ethan? Tell me the truth, at least now. And outside, hidden among the trees, Jason smiled as he heard the shouts. The discord between them would be his best ally. The silence that followed Dawn's shout was deafening. Ethan stood frozen at the entrance of the library, observing the pain and betrayal etched on the face of the woman who had become the center of his universe. She stood beside the table, the documents scattered between them like evidence of a crime. "Richard Thompson was my partner," Ethan began, his voice low and controlled. "We were friends since college. We built the company together, from nothing. I trusted him like a brother." "And?" Dawn asked coldly, arms crossed over her chest like armor. "And he betrayed me, embezzled money from the company for 2 years to finance side projects. When I discovered it, I tried to resolve the situation amicably, but he forged my signature on fraudulent contracts, almost drove me to bankruptcy. I had to choose between legally destroying him or losing everything I had built." Dawn felt her chest tighten. "And you destroyed him?" "Yes," Ethan admitted without beating around the bush. "I sued, exposed the fraud, made sure he would never work in the industry again. It was total war. And when I appeared here, you immediately knew who I was." Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Dawn Thompson, daughter of Richard. Yes, I knew." The confirmation was like a slap. Dawn felt tears burning in her eyes. "That's why you helped me, out of guilt." "No," Ethan said with a vehemence that surprised her, taking a step toward her. "At first, perhaps yes. When you handed me that note, when I saw your full name on the documents Kevin prepared, I thought it was some kind of divine justice, a chance to redeem myself for having destroyed your father. So I was right. But you didn't let me finish," Ethan interrupted her, walking until he was close to her. "That lasted exactly 3 days. 3 days when I thought I was doing a good deed to clear my conscience. And then I began to truly know you." Dawn stared at him, fighting against the desire to believe him. "I began to notice how you folded the bath towels into perfect triangles, how you hummed softly when you thought no one was listening, how your eyes sparkled when you talked about books, how you treated Martha and Kevin with the same respect you would treat a millionaire." Ethan's voice grew softer. "And I realized you weren't Richard's daughter. You were Dawn, unique, special, nothing to do with your father's sins." "It's not that simple," Dawn murmured, but her resistance was diminishing. "Of course it is," Ethan said, finally coming, close enough to touch her face. "Do you think I would pretend to have feelings? Do you think I would fake those kisses, those nights talking about dreams and fears?" Dawn closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his hand against her skin. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Then believe this," Ethan whispered, leaning in to kiss her. But Dawn moved away before their lips touched. "I can't. Not now." The rejection hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. "Dawn, I need to think. I need to understand all of this." She picked up some of the documents from the table. "I want to read about what happened between you two. I want to know the whole truth, not just your version." "All right," Ethan said, even knowing those documents didn't favor him. "But there's one thing you need to know before you form your opinion about me." "What?" "Your father, Richard. He wasn't an innocent man I committed an injustice against. There were other things involved, things you might not have known." Dawn frowned. "What kind of things?" Ethan hesitated, clearly struggling with some internal dilemma. "He was involved with dangerous people, using the company to launder money from illegal activities. When I discovered it, I tried to convince him to get out of that life, but he was addicted to easy money." "You're lying," Dawn said automatically, but there was uncertainty in her voice. "Am I? Then explain to me why your mother never wanted to talk about him. Why you changed your name when you were 2 years old. Why Catherine was always so afraid when you asked about your father." Each of Ethan's words found an echo in memories Dawn had tried to ignore. The constant house changes. When she was little, Her mother's nightmares. The absolute refusal to talk about the past. "That doesn't change the fact that you lied to me," she said, but her voice no longer had the same conviction. "I lied by omission, yes. But my feelings for you are real. So real, they terrify me." Dawn was about to respond when the sound of breaking glass echoed through the house. Both turned toward the noise, hearts racing. "Stay here," Ethan ordered, but Dawn was already following him to the living room. What they found was a rock in the middle of the broken glass from the main window with a note tied to it. Ethan untied the paper carefully, read it quickly, and his face paled. "What does it say?" Dawn asked, even knowing she didn't want to know the answer. Ethan looked at her, and there was something new in his eyes. Real fear. "He wants to trade you for information about where I can be found in the next few days." "Jason knows you're important to me," Dawn murmured, the realization hitting her like lightning. "He knows more than that," Ethan said, rereading the note. "He knows about your feelings, and he's betting that you'll surrender yourself to protect me." Dawn felt her blood freeze in her veins. "How can he know about—" "Because someone is passing information to him," Ethan completed, anger beginning to replace fear in his voice. "Someone in here." They looked at each other, the terrifying realization that they had been observed, that their intimacy had been violated, seeming worse than any physical threat. "Ethan," Dawn said softly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "If something happens to me, I want you to know that I believe you. About my father, about your feelings, I believe you." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Ethan said with fierce determination. "I won't let it." But both knew that Jason had crossed all lines, and that the war that was coming would test not only their courage, but also the strength of the love they had found in each other. Outside, hidden in the shadows of the trees, Thomas, one of the security guards Ethan most trusted, finished typing a message to Jason. They argued. She discovered about her father. They're vulnerable now. The betrayal was closer than they imagined. The discovery of the traitor happened by chance, as the worst betrayals are often discovered. Dawn was in the kitchen preparing tea when she saw Thomas in the garden, talking on the phone near the rose bushes. Something in his posture, in the furtive way he looked at the house, made her pay attention. "She's more vulnerable now. The boss too. They had a big fight this morning," she heard Thomas say on the phone. Dawn's blood froze. Without making noise, she moved closer to the window, hiding behind the curtains. "Yes, I can disable the system for 15 minutes. Enough. Time for you to enter through the back," Thomas continued. "But the payment has to be doubled. I'm betraying a man I've trusted for years." Dawn felt the world spin. Thomas, the man Ethan considered family, the only one he completely trusted, was selling information to Jason. She ran to the office where Ethan was working, bursting through the door without knocking. "Thomas," she said breathlessly. "It's Thomas. He's passing information to Jason." Ethan looked up from the documents, processing the information. "Are you sure?" "I just heard him arranging to disable the security system." Ethan's expression transformed into a mask of cold fury. He had known Thomas for 8 years, had saved his family from poverty, paid for his daughter's medical treatment. The betrayal hurt more than any physical blow. "When?" he asked in a controlled voice. "I didn't hear clearly, but from what I understood, tonight." Ethan stood up, walking to the safe hidden behind a painting. "We're leaving now." "Where to?" "I have an apartment downtown that nobody knows about. Not even Kevin knows it exists." He removed documents, money, and a gun from the safe. "You take only the essentials. 5 minutes." Dawn ran to her room, putting some clothes in a bag. Her movements were mechanical, automatic, her mind still processing the enormity of the situation. When she returned to the office, Ethan was finishing a call. "Marcus will meet us at the apartment with a clean car," he explained. "We'll leave through the back, by the path that only I know." They left the mansion like fugitives, through the trail that cut through the dense woods behind the property. Dawn had never walked there, and in the darkness of night, with only Ethan's flashlight to guide them, every forest sound seemed like a threat. "Ethan," she whispered, when they stopped to rest. "Yes?" If something happens, nothing's going to happen, he cut her off firmly. But if it does, she insisted, I want you to know that I love you. The words escaped her lips before she could control them. It was the first time she had said it aloud, and the confession echoed in the darkness of the forest like a vow. Ethan stopped walking, turning to look at her. Even in the dim light, she could see the intensity in his eyes. Dawn! Don't say anything, she interrupted him. I just needed you to know. Ethan pulled her to him, kissing her with a desperate urgency, as if this might be their last kiss. When they separated, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he whispered. And that's why we're going to get through this. They reached the downtown apartment at 2 in the morning. It was a small but comfortable place, hidden on the top floor of an old building in Beacon Hill. Marcus was already there, with hot coffee, and information that made Ethan's blood boil. Jason isn't acting alone, Marcus said without preamble. I did some discreet investigations after you told me about the threats. He's involved with a human trafficking network, specializing in vulnerable young women. Dawn felt her stomach turn. What do you mean? He grooms young girls, usually from humble families, promises love and protection, then uses them in the scheme. When they try to escape... Marcus didn't finish the sentence, but the implication was clear. That's why he won't accept that you left him, Ethan said, anger growing in his voice. You're not just an ex-girlfriend to him, you're merchandise. That escaped. Dawn felt nauseated. All those times he said I was special, that I was only his. It was true, but not in the way you imagined, Marcus continued. You were special because you were a virgin, young, beautiful, worth a lot of money to his buyers. The revelation hit Dawn like a hammer. She remembered all the times Jason had insisted on meeting her friends, all the questions about her family life, about other girls in the neighborhood. It wasn't curiosity. It was mapping. How many? She asked hoarsely. From what we've discovered, at least 15 girls in the last 2 years, all between 16 and 20 years old, all missing. Ethan watched Dawn pale, her hands trembling. He approached her, wrapping her in his arms. That's why he's so determined to get you back, Ethan said. It's not just obsession, it's business. And now? Dawn asked, her voice almost inaudible. Now we're going to end this, Ethan responded with fierce determination. Marcus, I need you to contact the FBI. I want everything documented, all evidence gathered. I'm already in contact with a trusted agent, but Ethan... Marcus hesitated. They'll want Dawn as a witness. It will be dangerous. I'll do it, Dawn said immediately. If this can help other girls, I'll do it. No, Ethan said firmly. It's too risky. It's not your decision, Dawn replied, and there was a new strength in her voice. These girls are suffering because of me, because I escaped and they didn't. I have to help. Ethan was about to protest again when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello? He answered cautiously. Ethan Reed, said Jason's voice on the other end. I imagine you've already discovered my presence at the house. How did you get this number? Jason laughed. I have friends in many places, but let's get to the point. You have something that belongs to me. Dawn doesn't belong to anyone. You're mistaken. She's belonged to me since the day I met her, and you're just a temporary obstacle. Dawn signaled for Ethan to put it on speakerphone. She wanted to hear every word. What do you want? Ethan asked. Simple. Dawn returns to me voluntarily, and you continue to live. She doesn't return, and I guarantee your life becomes a hell before it ends. What if I offer you something else? Dawn said, surprising both Jason and Ethan. Dawn? Jason's voice changed, completely, becoming softer, almost affectionate. My dear, finally, where have you been? I was so worried. Cut the act, Jason, Dawn said with a coldness that impressed Ethan. I know what you do with the girls. I know about your business network. The silence on the other end of the line was revealing. I don't know what you're talking about, Jason finally said, but his voice had lost its confidence. I know everything, and I'm going to make you say a better offer than yours. You stop looking for me. Free all the girls you have under your control, and maybe I won't hand over all the evidence I have against you to the FBI. You don't have evidence of anything. Want to bet your freedom on that? Dawn challenged. The call ended abruptly, leaving the three in tense silence. That was very dangerous, Ethan finally said. It was necessary, Dawn replied. Now he knows I'm no longer running from him. I'm fighting against him. Marcus looked at the two. You know you just declared war on a psychopath, right? Then let the war begin, Dawn said, and Ethan realized that the frightened girl who had entered his office weeks ago had transformed into a determined woman ready to fight for her freedom and that of others. Jason's response came faster than they expected. The next morning, Dawn received a message on her cell phone with a photo that made her blood freeze. Her mother, Catherine, tied to a chair, blindfolded, a masked man pointing a gun at her head. My God, Dawn murmured, the phone almost slipping from her trembling hands. Ethan read the message accompanying the photo. Your mother or you? Choose wisely. You have until 6 p.m. to present yourself at the address I'll send. Come alone or she dies. This is impossible, Ethan said, taking the phone to examine the photo. Catherine was in Vermont, at your aunt's house. Dawn was in panic, walking back and forth across the apartment. He brought her back. Somehow he found out where she was and brought her back. Marcus, who had slept on the couch to help protect them, studied the photo with a professional eye. Ethan, look closely at this image. Something strange. Ethan took the phone again, zooming in on the photo. The quality is too good for a kidnapping photo. And the lighting, it looks like a studio. Dawn stopped walking. What are you implying? That maybe it's a manipulation, Marcus said cautiously. Jason is smart. He knows your mother is your weak point. He could be bluffing. And if he's not? Dawn shouted, the tension exploding. What if she's really in danger because of me? Ethan approached her, taking her hands. We'll find out. Marcus, can you contact her aunt in Vermont? While Marcus made the calls, Dawn couldn't stop looking at the photo. Her mother looked so fragile, so frightened. Guilt was eating her from inside. Dawn, Marcus said after a few minutes. I spoke with your aunt. Catherine is there, safe. She arrived last night very worried because you weren't answering the phone, but she's fine. The relief Dawn felt was so intense that her legs weakened. Ethan supported her, pulling her to him. It was a manipulation, she murmured against his chest. But how did he get a photo of her? Probably from social media or some old document, Marcus explained. Current technology makes it easy to create these forgeries. The phone rang again. This time it was a different number. Very smart, Dawn, said Jason when she answered. You checked if Mommy was really in danger, didn't you? But let's see if you're smart enough for what comes next. Enough games, Jason. What do you want? Simple. A meeting, face to face, to resolve this like adults. Where? Dawn asked, ignoring Ethan's frantic gestures not to accept. At the abandoned warehouse on Industrial Street, 847 East Side. Know it? Dawn knew it. It was a degraded area of the city full of empty buildings and deserted streets. I know it. Excellent. Today, 7 p.m. and Dawn, I'll come alone. If I see any sign of company, I'll disappear, and next time it won't be a fake photo of your mother. The call ended, leaving the apartment in tense silence. You're not going, Ethan said immediately. Yes, I am, Dawn replied with determination, but not alone. He said for me to come alone. He didn't say anything about you not being nearby. Marcus smiled. I like the way she thinks. In the following hours, they prepared a meticulous plan. The FBI agent Marcus had contacted, Agent Reynolds, agreed to coordinate a discreet operation. There would be officers strategically positioned around the warehouse. Ethan would be in a nearby building with direct communication, and Dawn would wear a hidden transmitter. If something goes wrong, Ethan said, checking the tiny device that would be attached to the collar of her jacket, you run. Don't try to be a hero. Don't try to save anyone. Just run. What if he has other girls there? Dawn asked. The police will take care of that. Your mission is just to get him to confess the scheme. With that recorded, we can bring down the entire network. At 6:30 p.m., Dawn was parked 3 blocks from the warehouse, her heart beating like a war drum. Ethan was positioned in a building with a view of the location, and his voice in the earpiece was her only connection to safety. "Remember the plan," he said softly. "Go in, let him talk, get out. That's simple." "Simple," Dawn repeated, but they both knew that nothing about that situation was simple. When she arrived at the warehouse, Dawn found the door open. The interior was dark, illuminated only by some improvised spotlights. Jason was in the center of the empty space, thinner than she remembered, his eyes with a gleam that made her realize he had definitely crossed the line of sanity. "My beautiful." "Dawn," he said, opening his arms as if to embrace an old friend. "How you've grown. How you've become more valuable." "Valuable?" Dawn repeated, keeping her distance. "In the market, darling. Virgin girl, pretty, from a humble family. You have no idea how much a piece like you is worth." Dawn felt bile rise in her throat. "Is that how you see women? As pieces in a game?" "I see them as business opportunities," Jason replied with frightening naturalness. "And you were my most lucrative opportunity until that old man playing protector appeared." "Ethan saved me from you." "Ethan stole you from me," Jason shouted, the mask of civility completely falling. "You were mine. I found you first, I trained." I prepared you." "Prepared me for what?" Dawn asked, although she already knew the answer. "To be perfect for my clients. Naive enough not to ask questions, beautiful enough to be worth a fortune, scared enough not to try to escape." Each word was like a slap in the face, but Dawn forced herself to continue the conversation, knowing that each confession was being recorded. "And the other girls? Where are they?" Jason smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Working. Some in Boston, others were exported to special clients abroad, all very grateful for the opportunity I gave them." "Grateful for being enslaved?" "Grateful for getting out of poverty and becoming useful to society." Dawn felt a fury she had never experienced before. "You're a monster." "I'm a businessman," Jason corrected. "And you, my dear, are going to return to work for me. The difference is that now I know you have the potential to be more than just merchandise. You can help me recruit other girls." "Never." "Oh." "Yes, you will," Jason said, and Dawn realized he wasn't alone. Shadows moved at the edges of the warehouse, men emerging from the darkness. "Because if you don't come willingly, you'll come by force, and this time there's no Reed to save you." It was then that Dawn heard Ethan's voice in the earpiece. "Now, Dawn, run now!" But before she could move, Jason's men advanced. Dawn ran toward the door, but one of them blocked it. She was surrounded, and Jason laughed like a lunatic. "Did you really think I wouldn't know you were planning something?" he guffawed. "I've known every move you've made for days." Dawn felt despair take over. They had fallen into a trap. But then, as if in answer to her prayers, the sound of sirens approaching was heard, and Agent Reynolds's firm voice echoed through a megaphone. "FBI! The building is surrounded! Surrender!" Jason looked around, realizing that this time he had underestimated his adversaries. "This isn't over," he shouted at Dawn as the officers invaded the warehouse. "I always find a way." But when Dawn saw Ethan running toward her, she knew that this time finally she was truly safe. 6 months later, Dawn was sitting on the balcony of the new apartment she shared with Ethan in Back Bay, watching the street movement while having breakfast. It was a sunny Saturday spring morning, and for the first time in a long time she felt completely at peace. Jason's trial had concluded the previous week. Sentenced to 25 years in prison for human trafficking, racketeering, and a series of other crimes the investigation revealed. The network he commanded was completely dismantled, and 14 girls were rescued and were receiving psychological counseling and support to rebuild their lives. Dawn had testified in court with a courage that impressed even the most experienced prosecutors. Her statement, firm and emotional, was decisive for the conviction. When she left the courthouse after hearing the sentence, she cried, not from sadness, but from relief. The nightmare was finally over. "Still thinking about the trial?" Ethan asked, approaching from behind and wrapping her in an affectionate embrace. A little, Dawn admitted, leaning back against his chest, more thinking about how our life has changed. And it had changed completely. After Jason's arrest, they went through intense months of adaptation. The media had discovered the story, and for a few weeks they were the topic of the moment, the millionaire businessman and the young woman he saved from a criminal scheme. Comments on social media oscillated between romantic support and cruel criticism about the difference in age and social position. "Do I care what they say about us?" Dawn had asked Ethan on one of those difficult nights. "What do you think?" he had replied, kissing her forehead. "I think they haven't lived what we've lived, haven't loved as we love." And it was this certainty that sustained them through the external turbulence. Dawn resumed her studies, taking literature at a private university whose tuition Ethan insisted on paying, despite her initial protests. "It's an investment in our future," he had said, "in all the dreams we're still going to realize together." She quickly adapted to academic life, discovering that her traumatic experience, paradoxically, had given her a maturity and perspective that differentiated her from her colleagues. She began to work as a volunteer at an NGO that helped victims of human trafficking, finding purpose in transforming her pain into an instrument to help other women. Ethan, in turn, drastically changed his way of seeing life. The company continued to prosper, but now he delegated more responsibilities, spending more time at home, more time with Dawn, more time simply being happy. The guilt over Helen's death, which had tormented him for years, had finally found peace, not because he had forgotten his first wife, but because he understood that honoring her memory didn't mean condemning himself to eternal solitude. "Do you think Helen would approve of our story?" Dawn had asked one night, as they looked at the photos of the deceased wife that Ethan kept in his office. "I think she would be happy to know I found love again," he had replied, and for the first time talking about Helen didn't bring pain, but gratitude. That Saturday morning, as they embraced on the balcony, Ethan pulled a small velvet box from his robe pocket. "Dawn," he said, turning her to face him. She looked at the box, her heart racing. "Ethan, I know we're different. I know our story began in an unconventional way. I know some people will always question our love." He opened the box, revealing an elegant and delicate engagement ring. "But I also know that you're the woman I want to spend the rest of my life with, the woman who taught me that it's possible to start over, that it's possible to be happy again." Dawn felt tears streaming down her face. "Are you sure? Are you sure you won't regret choosing a simple girl like me?" "You're not simple," Ethan said, wiping her tears with his thumb. "You're extraordinary. Brave, resilient, generous, intelligent. You're not the girl I met that first day. You've transformed into an amazing woman. And I've become a better man because of you." "Yes," Dawn whispered, extending her hand for him to place the ring. "Yes, I accept." The kiss that followed was different from all the others. There was no more fear, no more uncertainty. It was the kiss of two people who had found in each other not just love, but redemption. 3 months later, they married, in a small intimate ceremony in the garden of the mansion where everything began. Catherine was there, radiant, finally seeing her daughter truly happy. Marcus was the best man. Martha organized all the decoration with the roses she herself cultivated, and Kevin, who had become head of security after Thomas's dismissal, ensured it was the safest and most perfect day possible. "Do you remember the note you gave me that first day?" Ethan asked during the wedding waltz. "Help me," Dawn laughed. "How could I forget? You know that in the end it was you who helped me, don't you? You saved me from an empty life, from a guilt that was slowly killing me." "We saved each other," Dawn corrected, looking into her husband's eyes, "and we'll continue saving each other every day." A year after the wedding, Dawn graduated in literature with academic honors. Her thesis on literature as an empowerment tool for women victims of violence was published and became a reference in the field. She had found her vocation, teaching, writing, helping other women find their voices. Ethan expanded his business, but now included a social foundation that Dawn directed, focused on combating human trafficking and supporting victims of domestic violence. They had transformed their pain into purpose, their story into inspiration for others. On a winter night 2 years after the wedding, they were dining at home when Dawn made an announcement that changed everything again. "Ethan," she said, taking his hand across the table, "I have news." "What kind of news?" he asked, noticing the special gleam in her eyes. "The kind that will arrive in 7.5 months. Ethan was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Then his face lit up with the purest joy Dawn had ever seen. "Really?" he whispered. "Really," she confirmed, laughing through tears of happiness. Ethan stood up, walked around the table and picked her up, spinning her in the air as if she were made of porcelain. "I love you," he said, kissing every inch of her face. "Love you, love our life, love our future. Even if people say we're crazy, that our age difference will be a problem when the baby grows up." "People will always talk," Ethan replied, setting her down but keeping her in his arms. "But we know the truth. We know our love is real, that our family will be built on a solid foundation of respect, affection, and mutual admiration." Dawn smiled, touching her still flat belly. "He will be very loved." "He or she," Ethan corrected, "will grow up knowing that it doesn't matter where you come from or what you've been through. What matters is who you choose to become and with whom you choose to share the journey." And as they stood there, embracing in the kitchen of their home, planning the future of their little family, Dawn thought about how unpredictable life could be. She had entered that company 2 years ago as a desperate girl delivering a plea for help. Now she was a fulfilled woman, married to the love of her life, about to become a mother, using her experience to help other people. Sometimes the most unlikely endings are also the most perfect, and sometimes loves that begin in the darkest places are those that shine with the most intensity. Dawn and Ethan had proven that there are no rules for the heart, only truths, that true love heals, transforms, and above all, liberates. Outside, the rain began to fall again, like that first day. But this time, instead of bringing fear,